and welcome back to Legacy Premier League. My name is Edgar. I'm here with Jarvis. How's it going, Jarvis?
It's going great. I'm looking forward to watching some Legacy Magic tonight.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Before we get to that, though, we got to thank our sponsors. Thanks to Wizards of the Coast, of course, and Card Hoarder, and to our very special sponsor, Scott Monroe, for helping us here at the Legacy Premier League with everything that we do. So before we get into the matchup, let's look at the playoff bracket real quick. We're in the lower side of the bracket here, so this is an elimination match between Phil Gallagher and Pleasant Kenobi. How do you So between these two people, the loser is going to be eliminated, and then the winner is going to stay in the tournament. And we did a poll on Twitter to see what they think is going to win the matchup. So let's head over there and see who they voted for. And we have a 57% favorite for Pleasant Kenobi here. Pretty close matchup. Oh, it says Brian Gottlieb, but it's not Brian Gottlieb. It's Phil Gallagher.
It's kind of funny because both of these guys are sort of known for playing Death and Taxes. So honestly, I would have put it at 50-50 myself.
For sure, yeah. We do have an Abs and Maverick versus Nick Fit deck, so not quite Death and Taxes on either side, but we are seeing some fair creatures. Who do you think is going to win, Jarvis, between Abs and Maverick on the Kenobi or on the Phil side and Nick Fit on the Kenobi side?
Gonna give a slight edge to Nick Fit, but we'll get into that later.
Yeah, I think I'll also give the edge to Nick Fit, only by a bit. I would guess by about 7%. All right, let's look at the deck list now. We have Abs and Maverick from Phil. A little bit of a different take for the regular Maverick decks. We've seen this deck called Dark Maverick in the past, although there's no copies of Dark Confidant, just a small black splash for stuff like Abrupt Decay and Plague Engineer. Do you notice anything else that you like about this list?
I particularly am fond of the Shifting Ceratops myself.
Yeah, that is quite the interesting one. Protection from blue being very relevant in this legacy format, obviously cannot be countered, but also giving protection from stuff like True Nemesis, Oak with Thief of Crowns, which is a new staple of the format. Definitely an interesting card, and with 4 copies of Green Suns, you get a lot of value in putting those 1-ups in your deck.
I'm also pretty fond of the Plague Engineer in his main deck because this shows an understanding of building for your opponent, not just in a general deck. Like in a Grand Prix, you really don't want to build a deck this way, but in this format, it's very different. You want to sort of narrow your deck down to where it'll be most effective versus your opponent.
Totally, yeah. And you see the copy of Palace Scaler and Knight of Autumn. I'm not sure how many of these are usual staples in Maverick deck main decks, but definitely cards that would be pretty powerful if you expected a fair mirror match, possibly including cards like Stoneforge Mystic.
Agreed.
So let's look over at Vince's deck now, the Nick Fit deck. This is definitely the more exciting of the two decks, something that we don't see very often.
I 100% agree. Yeah. I don't know how many people in this chat have played with Yawgmoth Thraben Physician, but boy, is it a messed up card in any sort of fair mirror match.
Totally, yeah. Three full copies from the Kenobi side of Yawgmoth. Definitely not a card I've played against in Legacy. I've lost to it a bunch Unlimited. I've lost to it in Summon Modern. Yeah. But, Legacy is a different animal, and with Veteran Explorer able to power it out quickly or be fodder to stack to it, it could definitely take over a lot of battlefields.
Yeah, interesting you bring up the limited standpoint. My viewpoint of these decks versus each other, it's going to look more like a limited battle, I think. So Yawgmoth sort of plays out in that sort of good grindy role. Like it can wrath your opponent if you're given enough time because you just put counters on things, start discarding cards, put more counters on things. I think you're really going to see 2 attrition-y draft decks sort of battle it out here.
Definitely, yeah, and I think Kenobi is going to take more of the control route in that sense. He does have more of a late game power with Yawgmoth. He has more powerful Green Sun Zenith targets like Sigarda and Titania to take over the battlefield, and Pernicious Deed as a Wrath of God. But Phil does have some cheaper stuff and 4 copies of Source of Plowshares that Kenobi doesn't have to perhaps clear the way early.
Yeah, a few interesting notes is Caracas is actually really, really, really good in this deck now that I look at it. Just look at
Mm.
how many of Kenobi's creatures are high impact creatures that are legends. There's Titania, there's Sigarda. Well, Sigarda has hexproof. There's Marin, and there's Yawgmoth. Just keeping those immune from the opposing plows, I think, is going to be a big deal.
Yeah, totally. And Caracas on the other side in Phil Gallagher's deck as well. So we're gonna see
Oh,
Caracas's bouncing your
yeah.
own creatures, bouncing your opponent's creatures. It's gonna be going both ways. It's gonna be an interesting battle for sure.
Yeah, I expect it to be fairly even, but I do think there's a slight edge to Kenobi because of the presence of Pernicious Steed.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. Looks like the players are ready though, so let's head down to the battle. Phil has won the die roll here. We see the copy of Caracas in Phil's hand, also a copy of Gaia's Cradle and another land, and just a bunch of random creatures.
Yeah, I think both of them have a bunch of random creatures in their hand.
This turn one Mother of Runes on the play is going to be really relevant, I think, because like I said earlier, Kenobi not with any copies of Swords of Plowshares. He's just a straight up black green deck, right? Um,
Yeah,
oh
yeah.
no, sorry, he has Lingering Souls and some white one of, so he has a small white splash, but nothing big enough to warrant playing Swords of Plowshares over the other black and green removal spells. So this turn one Mother of Runes on the play could be really relevant if the games come down to a creature battle.
So I really like this play from Kenobi. You take the 2-drop because Phil has no other 2-drops. And also I think you kind of don't care about his Plague Engineer. So you can therapy the Tireless Tracker next turn.
Yeah, the Plague Engineer not that effective against Kenobi's deck.
Agree.
Actually, it could be somewhat of a liability if he names whatever creature type Veteran Explorer is. I assume it's a human. Um, and no other X1 creatures that are relevant. I don't believe beyond that. So taking the 2-drop there makes a lot of sense, and leading on Thoughtseize over Cabal Therapy just so that you could have the training wheels esque Cabal Therapy after the fact is definitely good.
Agreed. One thing that Plague Engineer is really good at doing is killing spirit tokens from Lingering Souls. So
Good
that's a
point.
good use case for it. Um, so I think there will be a therapy on tracker just because like the engineer is just a gray ogre right now.
Yeah, I think I agree with that too, and not taking the tracker means that future copies of Veteran Explorer will be even more of a liability.
Yeah.
Since Veteran Explorer is one of those cards where it's really interesting because against a lot of decks, it's super duper powerful, right? If you could ever tutor out 2 lands and your opponent gets 1 or 0, you're just really far ahead. But against these decks with a lot of basics like the D&Ts, the Mavericks, the
Mhm.
Miracles of the world, it's certainly less powerful than its ceiling.
Interesting point from the chat. You can grab Dried Arbor to flashback therapy, and that's in fact what you're seeing right here.
Yeah, that is a great point from the chat, actually.
That's devastating.
Yeah, that is getting both copies of Plague Engineer here. Like we mentioned, Plague Engineer is not super important, but
But I
getting two
mean,
copies of them is pretty enticing. It's you can't turn down a 2-for-1 like that.
yeah. Ooh, Thalia off the top. That's going to be sort of annoying, actually.
Yeah, it's gonna slow down this Liliana because Kenobi did have to sacrifice his land drop in order to make that play, right? He had to set himself back a turn in a sense by fetching out that Dryad Arbor and flashing back the Cabal Therapy. And with a handful of 3-drops, Tyler's Tracker is effectively a 4+ drop, and Sigarda being a 5-drop. Like it was a pretty huge cost. So this Lalia is gonna hinder even more. And this Green Sun Zenith off the top is kind of a slap in the face almost
Yeah,
because you
because
you
he
want
already
to get
used his
better
Dried
for
Arbor. Yeah,
exactly, yeah,
yeah.
and now the Thalia is preventing that.
Yeah, I think he realized he was going to Zenith for the Arbor, but he realized he used the Arbor already to therapy.
Yeah, I thought he was trying to Zenith for one and then realized that there was the Thalia attacks, but either way it wouldn't work,
Yeah.
and the Thalia ended up being pretty relevant there. Although he can Zenith next turn for a Veteran Explorer, and Veteran Explorer on a board like this when Phil has no info on Kenobi's hand other than he's not casting anything is pretty scary because Phil can capitalize on the mana, but if your opponent has 5 cards in hand, you can only assume that some number of them are expensive cards. So attacking into a Veteran Explorer would be a pretty sketchy proposition, I think.
Great play there from Phil. Attacking with the Mother Runes makes a lot of sense.
Why is that, Jarvis?
Because if you map out the previous turns, if he had had a removal spell, he would have probably. Oh, I guess he didn't actually really have a good window to use it, did he? But maybe he thinks since Phil has so many cards in hand, or sorry, Kenobi has so many cards in hand, he just needs to get the aggro on and try to end the game before the extra cards become relevant. That's actually
Yeah,
probably what's going through his mind.
yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, right? We did talk
Yeah,
about Phil being the beatdown in this matchup. You can't go late against cards like Yawgmoth and Pernicious Deed, so getting in those extra few points of damage could be really relevant. And worst case scenario, he does have this Caracas back to protect his Thalia if need be, so it's not even
exactly.
like he's
Yeah.
opening himself up too much. Makes a lot of
The
sense.
only
Definitely a heads up play from Phil.
the only downside is if your Mother Runes gets killed, it might be slightly awkward.
All right, totally. So we see Kenobi opting to play the Tyler's Tracker instead of Green Sun Zenithing for Veteran Explorer or some other one drop. I think that's the only one he has though. What do you think of that play? Do you think he's trying to save the Green Sun Zenith for perhaps a more high value target? Something like a Scavengers perhaps?
Well, I think if you do it this way and then you draw a sack outlet for your Explorer next turn, it becomes much better for you.
Mm-hmm. That's
So
a good
that's
point.
but the problem is it's actually sort of hard to sacrifice the Veteran Explorer for free, unless if you draw exactly Phyrexian Tower because of the Thalia in play.
Yeah, Phyrexian Tower is definitely a nasty one. Definitely really powerful when the deck draws it naturally. Obviously, you can't play too
Mhm.
many of them for various reasons, but I think this tile playing this Tiles Tracker was kind of like a higher upside play because also if he just draws a land, having the Tiles Tracker in play already is going to be pretty relevant because if he just got the Veteran Explorer, it probably would have been off the battlefield by the time the Tiles Tracker entered. But it doesn't mean that he is likely going to be taking more damage this turn, since I don't think Phil has any qualms with attacking into this Tyler's Tracker.
Yeah, you can't really block here, and taking 3 is kind of a lot, but if you draw a land, Lingering Souls is actually sort of a good safety valve. Oh, I
Yeah,
think we drew Titania instead.
another 5 drop, definitely not what he wanted there.
No.
But getting Veteran Explorer here is pretty good, and actually now that he's developed this Tyler's Tracker already, if this
Yeah.
Veteran Explorer goes off, he's able to immediately crack a clue, which is pretty relevant. And one card we haven't talked about yet that Kenobi could be drawing into is another kind of wrath effect on this board. He has a copy of Orzhov Pontiff, which would
Oh
be
my
pretty
god.
pretty devastating on this board, being able to wipe the entire opposite side of the battlefield at virtually no cost.
So if you're Phil here, do you just pro green your Thalia, get in for 3? Because that means the second Mother of Runes is lethal next turn. And I think
Yeah,
that's exactly what he's going for.
I think you have to do this. You can't attack into the Veteran Explorer. You just giving Kenobi access to 2 more mana when he's clearly
Hmm.
mana screwed, plus an extra draw off the Tyler's Tracker is way too much of a liability. And
Yep.
and Phil knows that he only has a couple pieces of spot removal, so tapping this Mother of Runes is not that high of a cost at all. And he just wants to get this game over with as quickly as possible.
Oh, Mother of Runes is not lethal next turn, actually. Mostly
Because the
because
Exalt to trigger.
yeah, exactly. If we draw another Noble Hierarch, I guess the
Get
Mother of Runes doesn't do anything except protect you from. Okay, if we draw a Noble Hierarch, playing second Mother of Runes lets you beat the Lingering Souls.
right, but yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so
Being able to attack you through 2 different kinds of blockers. Regardless, I think even without this Mother of Runes in hand, he would be making a play like this. He's just got to get in the points of damage. You can't sit around forever.
great. It's like the classic Flood versus Screw conundrum,
Hmm.
except it's kind of weird. I don't think Phil's actually flooded. He's just drawing a bunch of low impact cards, right?
Yeah, he got stripped earlier with that Cabal therapy, and kind of just hasn't really recovered. Only has drawn some tiny 1 and 2 mana creatures, but
Hmm.
getting the job done. This Thalia ended up being super relevant. It's preventing this Lingering Souls and this Liliana the Last Hope from coming onto the battlefield. And Phil just needs to fade for one more turn basically. And honestly, is Kenobi on a one outer here, Jarvis? I'm not sure he can draw anything besides Orzhov Pontiff to get back into this game at this stage.
Let's take a quick look.
None of the pieces of
Via
the board were
Cardboard.Live.
good enough. Pernicious Deed is too slow in
Yeah,
the face of Thalia.
it's a 2-outer. You can draw Knight of Autumn to gain 4.
Okay, yeah, yeah, that is a good point, and that would
I
buy
mean,
him. That would buy him at least
2.
one more turn.
Yeah.
Wouldn't quite get him 2 more turns, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna have to draw something relatively good. Because the Lingering Souls doesn't cut it. None of the cards in Kenobi's hand actually cut it, right? That's the problem.
Right, that is the problem. Yeah, so he only has access to 3 mana and whatever his draw step is. So
Second
what do you think?
veteran.
What do you think went wrong that game, Jarvis? Do you think Kenobi could have done anything better? I think if he sequenced in that veteran explorer first instead of the Talos tracker, he would have bought himself at least one more turn and prevented 3 points of damage. But do you think he could have done anything else differently?
So to me, the major turning point of that game was whether to decide to flash back the therapy on the Plague Engineer or not, right?
Right, because that set him back a turn and
Yeah.
sacrificed a land drop.
Yeah. So you traded board presence for card advantage, and perhaps if you think about it, Kenobi's deck is really good at getting card advantage as it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps you didn't want to trade the tempo for the cards.
Yeah, it's kind of like a role assessment type thing, right? So
Yeah.
as the control deck, perhaps he should be more concerned about tempo or board presence, like you're speaking of, than
Mm-hmm.
card advantage. He could get that second copy of Plague Engineer at a future point, perhaps even the next turn. But losing out on that land drop and that turn of tempo is something that cascaded throughout the entire game. And ultimately it led to his downfall, I believe, right? Because he ended up taking 3 or 4 extra points of damage from there. He never found another land drop, so he was stranded with extra cards in hand. It all cascaded into more and more.
Yeah, to be fair, he did not know about the Thalia at the point he made that decision.
Yeah,
The
the Thalia
top
came
deck
right off the
Thalia,
top.
yeah, but you can sort of think about worst case scenarios like what if he drew Thalia? Can I play around it in some sort of way? What what is the disaster scenario essentially is possibly something that we should have taken into account. But um I do understand the appeal of just stripping the entire hand because then if your opponent just draws lands, they probably not going to just win with a lonely Mother of Runes, right?
Right. So we see Kenobi bringing in some extra removal spells in favor of some discard spells and expensive planeswalkers. Makes a lot of sense. Definitely his role in the matchup to do so. And we see Phil bringing in Path to Exile, perhaps terribly afraid of the card Yawgmoth, in addition to Sanctum Prelates and
Yeah.
Thoughtseizes. That all seems to me like a concession to the fact that he knows that Kenobi has so many powerful cards that are difficult for him to beat. Then he just has to bring in these awkward cards that perhaps he wouldn't otherwise want.
Hey, one really interesting thing that I just noticed, Phil's deck only plays one Wasteland.
Um, no,
Oh, it's
I think it's
three
just
three
error.
plus one.
Yeah, it says 3 wasteland and then 1 wasteland below that. I don't
What
know
the
if it's
hell?
four total or one
Okay.
total, but
Oh. Okay. Is it 3 or 1? I mean, in any case, I don't think it affects the matchup that much because it's pretty easy for Kenobi to get a bunch of basics, right?
yeah, Kenobi is very basic focused. We see a really premium hand here from Kenobi. He has access to turn 1 therapy
Uh-huh.
into turn 2 explorer plus therapy, or perhaps turn 1 explorer, turn 2 triple therapy. So a lot of options from Kenobi. I think he's more likely to play a therapy on turn 1 in order to not expose his veteran explorer to
Agreed.
a source of plowshares or path to exile. And from Phil's side, we see a little bit of ramp and some late game payoff and some disruption. Probably a little bit more disruption than he would like, but he's already on 6 cards, so
Yeah.
perhaps an easy keep from his side.
Also, I 100% agree with bottoming that Scrib Ranger here.
Scribringer, an innocuous card. I don't know how many
Yeah.
times you've blown out by that card, but I know I have quite a few times. Protection from blue randomly, and it's almost just never on the forefront of your mind when you're playing against these decks as a card that you need to play around.
I've gotten a phantasmal image killed by Script Ranger. That did not feel great.
Yeah, that does not sound too nice.
um, so yeah, you have a lot of tough decisions for Kenobi's side.
So I think the biggest choice from Kenobi's side, because I think especially with this basic forest, he's much more likely to start off with a turn one Cabal therapy. And the question
Uh-huh.
from his side is just what card do you want to therapy in the dark? Because there's always going to be one card that he has to name in the dark, and then he's going to have good
Agreed.
information for the future cards.
So
Um,
what I would do is look at Phil's deck list, determine what four of you want to name, and just name it probably.
So that's interesting because I think that would make more sense if you didn't have so many discard spells after the fact. Because any four of like any high impact four of like a Green Sun Zenith or
Mhm.
whatever, like he's gonna have access to getting that later. I think what he should be more concerned about is what one mana cards can Phil play that would be a really big hindrance to his game plan of going discard spell, Veteran Explorer, two more discard spells. Um, and I know that's easy to say from my perspective because
Sure.
we could see the hand here, but that I think if you were to go through that thought process, the card that would interrupt you the most would be the copy of Thoughtseize that Phil has in his hand.
Well, so to turn that point back on your head, if you treat this sort of as a grindy mid-range battle, do you necessarily even want Thoughtseize in your deck versus Kenobi?
Yeah, that is interesting actually. It's possible he doesn't even expect that the three copies came in from the side.
Exactly. Exactly. That would be my counterpoint, and that's why I'm fine with him naming Mother of Runes there, frankly.
Yeah, Mother of Ruins
Um,
was a good name because that is the four of like you mentioned that is kind of difficult for his hand to currently interact with.
mhm.
Um, So I think that does make a lot of sense, but definitely something to think about. Definitely a lot of things to think about even on the first turn of the game before you even cast a spell, which is what makes Legacy great. Phil ended up
Agreed.
thoughts using the copy of Tireless Tracker over the copy of Veteran Explorer, which makes a lot of sense because he can access two lands out of his deck as well and use them pretty effectively. And with two payoffs in his hand with the Tracker and the Green Sun Zenith, he feels like he could use those. Ooh, look what came off the top, Jarvis.
Yeah, that's gonna be pretty good. So I don't think you name Path to Exile. I think that's the worst card in Phil's hand. But you can make a
Yeah,
case for any of the other three cards, I think.
yeah. I think with this Veteran Explorer being procced and with you having Yawgmoth
Hmm.
coming up, it's possible that you just want to take the two threats. Um,
Yeah.
since you can get rid of the tracker, you can get rid of the Green Sun Zenith, and then there's no really worry of proccing this Veteran Explorer because
Agreed.
if you leave Phil with either of those cards, then popping the Veteran Explorer becomes somewhat of a liability, right? The tracker's obviously going to be able to
Yep.
draw cards, and the Green Sun Zenith could
Yep.
get even is there another tracker in the deck? I don't believe there is, but a copy of Night of the Reliquary would also be a huge beating, obviously.
And you're actually seeing an interesting dynamic play out here. It's kind of weird, but I think siding in too much removal versus the deck that can go bigger versus you might be backfiring here, if that makes sense.
Yeah, especially against a deck that's as discard heavy
Yeah,
as Nick Fit, right? Because uh,
exactly.
he did have three effectively three or four discard spells, however you want to look at it,
Hmm.
this game. But even with just two copies, Phil would be on a hand that isn't able to apply pressure like he did in game one and give Kenobi a lot of time in order to find his haymakers.
Exactly. It's sort of like the paradigm that having too much removal versus like a control deck is not good. I think you're sort of seeing that play out here.
On the other hand, it's pretty difficult from Phil's perspective, right? Because a
Yeah.
card like Yawgmoth, if you don't have a removal spell, basically instantly is going to take over the game on its own, and perhaps that's something that Phil was maybe overly afraid of, but maybe rightfully afraid of as well, right? We don't know.
Mhm.
We're talking about the discard spells taking his threats, but in the same vein, if he has very few removal spells, those discard spells can take his removal spells, and he'll be unable to clear the way of these unbeatable threats.
Why are we fetching right now?
Not sure. Perhaps he's trying to sneak one of these white removal spells in, but Kenobi,
Uh,
obviously a
yeah.
seasoned veteran explorer player, is going to immediately sock into the Cabal therapy and not give Phil that opportunity.
So one very subtle thing that Kenobi did that I think a lot of people might not notice is he waited a turn to do this on the off chance Phil would draw the second copy of Hero's Tracker, I think.
Yeah, I think Phil only has one tracker actually.
No,
Uh,
he has two, I checked.
does he? Okay. Uh, yeah, so that makes a lot of
Oh
sense. He could
no,
have
he
drawn.
only has one. Never mind.
Oh,
I'm just a fool.
that's
But I think you still have to name it here because it's one of the ways Phil could snowball way out of control.
yeah, and if you thought that you were gonna name it anyways, then waiting a turn gives you the extra piece of information for the
Yeah.
draw step. You get punished by another discard spell, but perhaps he weighed that, and also meant he still had access to 4 mana this turn, so he could have still played Yawgmoth if he wanted to. Uh,
Mhm.
even though he waited a turn on the Veteran Explorer, he still gave himself that opportunity.
So I don't know if you know this, but there are some really weird interactions with Orzhov Pontiff versus Plague Engineer,
I do
depending on
know
what
this
the
actually.
engineer. Yeah, it's a fucking nice one, right?
Yeah, because
So
it's something I need to keep in mind every time I'm playing
against
my
humans,
mid range decks against humans. Yeah.
yeah. All right, so I'll explain it real. Oh yeah, I'll explain it real quick. What you can do is you can play the Pontiff if engineer is naming the appropriate creature type. It'll die immediately to the state-based actions. You can haunt the engineer, and then wait. Do you
No,
need?
you haunt so what you do is you haunt one of Phil's X1 creatures. If there's an X1
Oh,
creature
sure.
on the table, you can haunt it before the -1/-1 procs, and then
Yeah, yeah.
since it'll be haunted due to the state-based actions, like you said, you get another haunt trigger after the fact, and you can
Mhm.
kill the Plague Engineer. But
The
it looks like
problem,
Plague Engineer's not naming human. What is it naming? I can't quite see.
spirit, spirit for
Spirit. That makes
lingering
a lot of
souls.
sense.
Yeah. So the actual reason to play it out here is to prepare for the Yawgmoth next turn. Because if you have a creature in play, when you play Yawgmoth, you can sacrifice the creature to at least get a card. The problem with that is there's still the plow in hand that Vincent knows about. Oh,
Oh, it looks like
interesting.
he's going to
Okay.
plow the Pontiff, prevent any shenanigans. Pontiff also very powerful with Yawgmoth, if I'm not mistaken, as well, because you can do a similar trick where you sack the Pontiff, target an X1 creature, and then haunt that creature, and you get to trigger the haunt immediately off the Yawgmoth.
Yep. Let's check the creature type on Plague Engineer.
It's a carrier, Jarvis.
Yeah, I thought as much, but you never know with these 2019 cards. They could literally have any text on them.
Have you never played a 4-color snow mirror, Jarvis? Sometimes you gotta get a lot of Plague Engineers on carrier.
I can't say I have. I leave that to you.
So Phil tutoring up a Knight of the Reliquary, obviously a very powerful card. He's going to be able to. He boarded out his copy of Gaia's Credo, but he is going to be able to tutor up stuff like Nurturing Peatland, Dried Arbor, um, or
Oh, Caracas off the top!
oh that is a
That's
beating.
brutal.
That's one of the ones he could have tutored up, but honestly, much better to just naturally draw it
Yeah,
instead.
of course.
Being able to infinitely delay this Yawgmoth is going to be pretty devastating, and it also means that Phil can get in a 3-point attack if he wants to. Although I find that pretty unlikely. I think he's probably
Yeah,
just going to activate Find. I would assume a Nurturing Peatland, since Wasteland
agreed.
is not that powerful here. Perhaps Blast Zone if he feels like it, and just continue to press this advantage. It's going to be pretty difficult for Pleasant Kenobi to ever get this Yawgmoth online with having to tap 4 mana for it every turn.
Question for you. was there any merit to fetching Dryad Arbor and then using the Dryad Arbor to put a counter on one of their creatures?
Perhaps. I think the bigger reason to do that would not be to shrink the creatures, but to
Yeah,
draw into a removal spell.
exactly. Yeah,
Uh,
I'm concerned about just dying to all of this stuff because, like, the problem with not doing it right there is you have to spend another 4 mana to get that.
yeah, definitely. Ooh, oh
Oh!
God!
Oh! What?
What a
Is this real that we're
brutal
doing?
draw step.
Oh my god! Oh!
Man,
It's Pernicious Deed! What?
we look like fools now. Granting that Dryad Arbor would have been a
Oh,
horrible
yeah.
play.
Wow. Shows what I know.
Yeah. Pernicious Deed, obviously a very devastating draw here. Being able to
I
take
mean,
out the entire opposing board.
uh, so technically speaking, do you wait for your phone to untap? I probably wouldn't
No,
because
no,
they get to activate Night again, right?
for sure. Yeah, you don't want to give them access to a peat land. They opted to get in the damage, turn it into a 2-turn clock, and uh, you're going to be forced to pop it in combat anyway, so you might as well
Yeah.
just do it now.
Yeah. The Pete one thing I think is super relevant because they're hellbent right now.
Right.
Wow, that
So
was a really good draw.
probably the best draw possible. I'm sure Phil acutely aware of that possibility, but wanting to put the Knight of
Yeah.
Autumn into play in order to present a 1-turn clock. Um, and now we're back at parity. This Caracas does check the Yawgmoth, so it's still anyone's game. But I think I would give the edge to the Nickfit deck at this game state, of course, just because they have so
Agreed.
many more powerful
Yeah.
draws.
Yeah. We're at the point in the game, if you compare the two mana curves, Kenobi's deck just has more expensive cards in it, so it's naturally favored. And Greenstone Zenith right off the top. What do you think we'll get? Probably Sigarda, Host of Herons?
Yep, can't Caracas that one. Marin would be
Yeah.
a poor choice. Titania would not be that bad. You could make a 5/3 every turn if that's something that you wanted to do instead. But that opens yourself up to a possible drawn Swords of Plowshares or Path to Exile. So I think I would just opt to get the Sigarda here.
Yeah.
I'm not sure Phil's deck has any good ways to beat that.
I don't think so either. Like, it's really, 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 really hard for these Green X decks to kill Sigarda.
Or any deck for that matter. I'm not sure if many decks on Legacy that can beat a Sigarda once it hits the
Only
table.
only Tundra decks generally, I think.
Yeah, it's basically
Yeah.
Terminus and
Miss and
Emrakul Annihilator triggers.
Council's
Oh yeah,
Judgment too.
sure. Yeah,
Council's Judgment is the cheaty card.
that one shouldn't work. It's got Hexproof.
Yeah.
See
I
Ansi
was
laughing in the chat with his Terminuses.
yeah. I'm kind of sad that Phil didn't put Questing Beast into his Maverick deck because my favorite interaction of Questing Beast is versus True Name Nemesis.
Oh, you just gotta trample over it.
No,
Oh,
you
and it
just kill it.
kills it, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it just kills it.
just the old skull crack trick.
Yeah, the old skull crack trick. Crack
Have
'em.
you ever have you ever wild slashed your opponent when they block with their True Name Nemesis?
No, but I've died to Wild Slash with Glacial Chasm out.
Ooh.
It's basically the same thing, right? Oh my god, Oblivion Ring versus Cigar.
Phil needs a Sun Titan right now so that he can get that. Oh
Yeah.
wait, that wouldn't work either.
That doesn't work. It works with like pacifism, right?
With auras, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So Kenobi opting to get the Sigarda makes a lot of sense. This is a 4-turn clock that I'm not sure Phil has any ways of beating. If he draws some runner copies of Knight of the Reliquary, perhaps he can outsize the
Yeah, yeah.
Sigarda and create some sort of stalling pattern. But barring that, he's gonna need to draw something pretty quick.
That's what I was actually thinking. I think the most likely way you get out of that is to just make a bunch of big creatures that force the cigar to stay home. The window on that play is closing rapidly,
Mm-hmm.
so I don't think it's actually going to work. And here we see the Dryad Arbor cycled essentially for a free card.
Yeah, so you can be making this play now in response to the Caracas bounce. Makes a lot of sense. Can't really take no real reason to keep that 7th land, and
No.
it's a good opportunity to do this while he doesn't have anything else to do with his mana.
So we basically turn our fetch land into a Horizon Canopy.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. You
Wait,
gotta pay a life, but
wait. Did he
oh,
target?
did he target the Dryad
He
Arbor with the
targeted the
ability?
Yog. Yeah, you're supposed to not target anything with it to draw a card.
I think he needed to target his
Yeah.
Yawgmoth, right? Or is
No,
it another
you can.
creature?
It says up to. It says up to on it.
All right. So he opted to target his Dryad Arbor, which of course fizzled the ability.
Yeah.
And perhaps a misclick. I'm sure he knew that interaction. Perhaps
Yeah.
didn't mean to actually do that, but unfortunately going to cost him a card in this scenario. Not sure how relevant that's going to be. Phil didn't end up drawing a fatty this turn, and I'm not sure that he's going to be able to draw one quick enough. How big of is a Knight of the Reliquary if he draws it? It's only a 6/6.
Well,
So
there's a Landon play, right?
yeah, I was counting
Oh
that one.
no,
Sorry.
you were counting that one. Got it. Yeah, it looks like it's gonna be too slow.
Oh, Mother of Rids is interesting. Does Phil have any flyers that he can draw? He could draw the Scrib Ranger now, right? And just infinitely block the Sigarda.
Yeah. I think the Assassin's Trophy is gonna shut that down, obviously.
But that Mother of Runes did give him some backdoor outs that he thought he might not have. Oh, doesn't shifting Ceratops give the opportunity to give reach?
Oh, that's a nice one. Yeah.
Oh,
Yep,
so
it
so
does.
Phil has an out. He could draw the shifting Ceratops right now, and since Kenobi used his Assassin's Trophy, it would actually stabilize this board.
I think you're actually forced to trophy that Mother Runes because if you let it untap, then you're in the same situation except you can't actually kill the Ceratops, right?
Yep, correct. Yep,
Oh, so
it's the Ceratops.
it is a Ceratops. I mean, he had 5 copies of Ceratops in his deck.
Oh my
No,
god.
4. There was a Zenith in the yard, but so we Zenith for Ceratops, and we have to leave a green up.
What are the abilities on Ceratops, Jarvis? Is it just it's haste, trample, and reach, correct?
I believe that's true. I
No
always
big.
wondered about the reach aspect because how does a dinosaur stretch its head into the sky?
Well, clearly WotC just incorporated it so that it could block the Guardians in Legacy. I mean, I literally cannot think of another justification, and honestly, that just makes perfect sense to me.
Well, as Kanoxai says in the chat, it's because Ceratops shifts its head up. This is
Actually,
wild.
did oh, he did keep it in. So okay, I was gonna ask
Yeah.
if we thought it's possible that he boarded this card out since Kenobi's not playing a blue deck, but Phil acutely aware of the interaction between Ceratops and Sigarda.
Okay. All right. So key point: drawing creature there is very good for him. Do you see why? It will
Drawing a
shrink.
creature.
Yeah,
Oh,
it will just it will shrink the Ceratops to a 4/3.
oh wow, that was a huge draw from Kenobi.
Yeah, any creature did it.
Yeah, well, any 2 or 1 mana creature,
Yeah.
uh, very important there, and the fact that Phil drew this on this turn and not on an earlier turn means that he's forced to make the block here.
Yep. Really unfortunate. I think that's going to probably end the game on the spot.
Yeah, I'm not sure Phil has another opportunity. We can see him checking his deck list to perhaps determine what his outs are. Um, I'm not seeing anything either.
So we go
This
for the
scavenging,
Caracas to try to induce a misplay, but it's not going to work. Like,
right, forcing the action right now. Kenobi sees the line, shrinking the Ceratops. If only Sigarda was blue. If only that was a copy of Bruna instead.
oh wow, we're going to see all the sweet cards come from both decks come out this game. Essentially,
Yeah,
it's kind of nice.
it is pretty sweet. Not something you see on Legacy a lot, but
No.
a lot of bullets. But both decks are Green Sun Zenith deck, and both decks utilizing that to its full capabilities.
Plague Engineer not going to do it.
Not
Unfortunately,
quite.
that does not have reach.
Doesn't have reach, and Sigarda has slightly more than one toughness, so we're gonna get game 3. Wow,
Yeah.
that was a sick game. The
Yeah,
the fact the fact that it was anyone's game after that pernicious deed still was incredibly exciting. We see Phil
agreed.
bringing back into Thalia's on the play,
Yeah,
and
I
we see
think I
that.
like that. It delays the Pernicious Deed by another turn.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Perhaps trying to be a little bit more aggressive while he's on the play, uh, opting to instead take out protection spells, like other runes, which makes sense because Kenobi's removal is very clunky, and he frankly does not have that much spell removal in general. A lot of his removal
Mhm.
is mass removal.
Yeah, it might be valuable to have a small amount of it, which is what I think you're seeing happening here.
Yeah, so Phil, while on the play, is taking back out those 2 copies of Path to Exile, so he only wanted those in his deck while he was on the draw, or perhaps he felt the burden of them in that second game and decided against it for the third game.
Yeah, because like if one of those had been Athalia, I think the game looks a little bit different.
Right. He's at least not forced to extend that pernicious deed off the top as much, and maybe has
Mhm.
some follow up for after the fact.
So I think Phil's hand looks reasonably good, and it looks like Kenobi's hand is kind of land heavy. Although, can we move the teleprompter real quick?
Yeah, it looks like he has 6 lands and a scavenging ooze. But one of them
Oh,
is a Caracas, which is
yeah.
obviously pretty good against Phil. But I think from his side, I would definitely mulligan. Phil's hand looks
Okay.
pretty good. He has a 1/2 and possibly 3 curve. I can't see him ever mulliganing that.
Yeah. So an interesting point in these matchups. You really try to mulligan if at all possible in these mirrors because the games go long, so every raw card matters.
Mm-hmm.
Kenobi's hand was pretty good. The unfortunate thing is like it's sort of reactive, but maybe that's not even that big of a downside.
No, I think that's what he kind of wants in this matchup. Um, since his hand is very redundant against these Thoughtseizes, which is good in this specific scenario, but also this type of hand just maximizes the chances that he's going to delay the game as long as possible to get to uh, the late game that he knows favors him, like we saw in that second game with Sigarda. Just Sigarda
So
on its own and having access to 5 copies of it means that uh, Kenobi has just true inevitability, right? He's just always going to be able to win with that card.
yeah, I think so. The only way it goes awry is if you're forced to have to trade with it at some point, right?
Mm-hmm. Golgari Charm, a really sick card with Veteran Explorer since it can kill all your
Yeah,
opponent's creatures and also ramp you. But Phil going to not mess around and source the Plowshares that on the spot, even opting to not develop his Pride Mage instead. Makes a lot
yeah.
of sense. He's pretty deathly afraid of that thing going off, especially with no late game payoff in his own hand.
Huh. So you have two choices here. You could play the engineer, or you could play the Pride Mage plus Thoughtseize.
So a lot of Kenobi's scary cards are at least 4 mana, right?
Yeah.
Um, I think all the Green Sun Zenith payoffs are at least 3 mana. So um, I think that waiting a turn on the Thoughtseize wouldn't necessarily be that poor. That being said, the Primate does hit harder, and he might not know what he wants to name off this Plague Engineer yet, or perhaps values being able to kill something with it instantly before it's removed with a piece of spell removal. So not necessarily wrong to make this play either.
I was thinking that exact same thing, that you really don't know what you want to engineer yet. And again, going back to the like aggro versus control paradigm, I think playing a 3/3 is better than playing a 2/2 here.
Right. That being said, if he was to play the engineer, as long as he feels like he's going to always play the pride makes the following turn and ends up being the same amount of damage,
Oh, sure, sure, sure.
he could never guarantee that because he doesn't know what he's going to draw next turn, and I'm sure there are several draw steps that he would have on this following turn where he would rather play that than the follow up card, and then he'll appreciate that extra point of damage in those instances.
Huh. So we're seeing the same play from game one here. Um, guess it has to take Plague Engineer, right? Like we're kind of just not doing much.
Yeah, you want to stymie the beatdowns. I'm not sure what was named on the first copy, but
Oh my god.
something like Night of the Reliquary, which just came right off the top, and he's just trying to prevent as much damage as possible.
Oh,
Or
Tracker was named.
another good option. But he flashed it back, got the Plague Engineer, was trying to prevent as much damage as possible, but Night of the Reliquary came right off the top.
Yeah, and the other big issue is we don't have access to white mana. To be fair, he doesn't have that many white cards in his deck, but it's definitely going to be a liability here.
Right. Green Sun's gonna have a decent draw here. He can get his Scavenging Ooze. I think that would be the best card to get. He does know that Phil has this copy of Oblivion Ring, but Golgari Charm's going to be able to take care of that. And I think Scavenging Ooze is going to do a decent job at protecting or stabilizing this board state rather. The Phil can tutor up lands every turn with Night of the Reliquary, but it's not like out of a 4-color loam deck or whatever where
Right.
there's basically endless value to get. Once the one peat land is taken out and like the one Caracas is tutored up for value, it's not going to do as much after the fact. So perhaps
Question
Kenobi.
for you.
Yep,
Did Phil side out the Gaia's Cradle?
I think he did. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I saw him do that.
Yeah.
So Phil playing Ooze here to combat Kenobi's Ooze. He does have more green mana, and he gets the first activation, which is both a strong combination. And does he know about this Golgari charm? I believe he does know about this Golgari charm. So
He does. Yeah.
he didn't want to just play the Oblivion Ring into it. He instead decided to um, progress his own board state. Um, and also, there's only the 2 creatures in the graveyard, so he's able to get those right away
Yeah.
and prevent Kenobi from gaining any life off of his ooze. A big
This
draw
is
step there from Phil.
yeah. That worked out very well for him. Green Sun Zenith of our own.
So that's kind of the interesting feature or perhaps bug if you want to call it of these Nickfit decks is that Green Sun Zenith, although always a powerful card in the decks that play it, in these Maverick decks you have a lot more options in like the 2 to 3 mana range that you can get when you're choked on resources. But the Nickfit deck basically only has Veteran Explorer and then like 4 and 5 mana creatures to tutor with it in
Yeah.
terms of impacting the board. So in games where like this one where both players are on such low resources, it's certainly a less powerful card than it is from the Maverick deck. Be interested to see if Phil is going to play this Oblivion Ring just to almost falter for a turn.
I was thinking that too. I think that's good because you can take out the Explorer. I don't really foresee you losing if you take that out for a turn, attack with all of your creatures. That's a bunch of damage. And you also have a land to combat ooze, like doing anything special. But they're not even any creatures in graveyards, correct?
Correct, yeah, but the Kenobi's ooze can still shrink the Night of the Reliquary some, slowly but surely. Uh, but I think I do like that play a lot because without casting the Oblivion Ring this turn, uh, attacking is kind of a sketchy prospect, right? Giving Kenobi access to 2 more lands means that stuff like Pernicious Deed is going to be so much more of a powerful draw step, or Green Sun Zenith like we were talking about earlier. And Kenobi is at a fairly low life total. I think he might be able to threaten a kill in 2, although it's going to be pretty difficult with this Golgari term that Phil knows is coming afterwards. But I think with 2 copies of Thoughtseizes already used, Phil only has 3 total, and I'm not even sure if he brought in the 3rd copy. So this seems like an exchange that is going to happen at some point. So he might as well do it now while the mana is down for the Golgari charm.
Exactly. So I believe this knight is a 6/6. You can shrink it to a 5/5 and then block the Pride Mage, right?
Right. It's a good play. So you end up taking 9 points of damage.
Oh, that conveniently leaves the ooze as lethal next turn, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the ooze is going to be lethal next turn, but there is no way to prevent that, so he has to draw something here.
So it looks to me like Pleasant Kenobi is about to be eliminated, unfortunately for him.
Yeah, he needed to draw a 1 mana spell there, but I'm not sure. I suppose just additional copies of Veteran Explorer would have done that, but
Right.
we see Phil's aggressive line working out there. A good line, well played from both sides for sure.
Yeah, and you saw one of the clocks go into the red. That's how you know it's a grindy matchup.
Yeah, these fair green and white creature mirrors is
Yeah.
are always very interesting. Death and Taxes and by extension Maverick, Nifit, these style decks are always so subtly complicated, and I think a lot of people don't give them credit for being so.
Yeah, like just on turn 1, both of the players had tons of options, especially with Cabal Therapy, Veteran Explorer. How do you play the cards? What do you name? You know, what order do you play them in?
So congratulations to Phil. Condolences to Kenobi. He's been eliminated from the tournament. Up next, we're gonna have yourself, Jarvis, playing against Julian.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
I looked at the deck lists earlier today when they were posted, and I have to say I'm not the most thrilled, but I've played a lot of Grixis Delver, and the matchup versus any deck is not unwinnable, I would say. So
Yeah.
that's how I feel about it. I obviously think I would be a lot better off over playing a deck similar to yours, a more controlling, grindier Grixis style deck.
Tried to get you on that, Jarvis.
Yeah, I'm you know how stubborn I am.
And what Julian is playing a Death and Taxes style deck, correct?
He's just playing White Green Maverick. Yeah.
Okay. So it's gonna be a close one.
Mhm.
You're playing Grixis, which I believe has a nod over those style of decks over other Delver variants
Yep.
historically, correct? So
Yeah, I also have Fatal Pushes in my deck, which I think improves the matchup by a reasonable amount.
yeah, pretty considerably, I would assume. All right, well, best of luck to you, Jarvis. To those of
Thank
you
you.
on Twitch, we'll be back pretty soon for round 4. Thanks for joining us.